Welcome, curious minds, to another expedition into knowledge. Today, we're venturing into, well, the murky swamps of ancient Greek myth. We're going to confront a creature that's become this powerful symbol for, those really tough challenges, the kind that seem to multiply every time you try to tackle them. I'm talking about the Lernaean Hydra. We've gathered quite a collection of ancient narratives, poems, myths, even some historical analysis. Our mission is really to uncover the true nature of this legendary serpent. We want to trace that epic story of its defeat and maybe figure out why this ancient legend still holds such sway over us today.
Exactly. And it's much more than just looking at a monster. It's a really fascinating chance to see how a story changes over centuries, how it reflects beliefs, shapes culture, and how it really embeds itself in our collective thinking. We'll look at the what happened, sure, but also the why it matters, in the context of myth and even how we think now.
Okay, let's get into this. Get ready as we begin our exploration of the Lernaean Hydra. So let's start right at the beginning. Who was this creature? Where did it come from?
Well, the Lernaean Hydra, or often just the Hydra, was a monstrous serpent-like lake creature from Greek and Roman mythology. Its main haunt was the Lake of Lerna in the Argolid region of Greece. And this place, Lerna, wasn't just any lake. It was said to be an entrance to the underworld, an ancient sacred site, too.
Wow, an entrance to the underworld. That definitely sets a certain ominous tone right away. And its family tree is pretty notorious too, isn't it? It wasn't just spontaneously generated.
Oh, definitely not. According to Hesiod, one of our earliest sources, the Hydra was the offspring of Typhon and Echidna. And if you know your Greek monsters, those are like the top tier. Typhon, the father of all monsters, Echidna, the mother of all monsters, part woman, part snake. So the Hydra was basically born from primordial chaos and destruction, pure monster lineage. What's really chilling is how deadly it was supposed to be. Its breath, poisonous, its blood, so toxic that even its scent could kill. There's this description from Hyginus, a Roman writer, saying that just walking past it while it slept, breathing in the air around its tracks, could lead to this horrible, agonizing death.
Goodness, just its presence was lethal. A creature that literally poisoned its surroundings. Now, the thing everyone knows about the Hydra is the multiple heads. But the actual number, that seems to change depending on who's telling the story, right?
Exactly. That's one of the really interesting parts of how the myth developed. The oldest accounts we have, like Hesiod's Theogony, they mention multiple heads but don't give a specific number. And we've even found these ancient bronze pins, fibulae, from around 700 BC. They actually show a hydra with 6 heads.
6 heads, okay.
But then Alcaeus, writing about a century later, around 600 BC, he's the first one we know of who puts a number in writing. 9 heads.
9 seems to be the number most people remember.
It often is, but it didn't stop there. Later on, the poet Simonides cranks it way up, claims it had 50 heads.
50?
50. Imagine trying to fight that. Though, interestingly, some major writers, like Euripides and Virgil, they didn't specify a number at all. Maybe they just wanted to leave its immense danger sort of undefined.
50 heads is that's quite an escalation. It really shows how these stories grew in the telling. And that leads us to its most famous, most terrifying trait. When did that crucial detail become part of the myth?
Ah, yes, the regeneration. That's what really sealed its reputation as this symbol of, well, hopelessness. It seems Euripides was the first to really describe this ability clearly. He wrote that the monster grew back 2 heads for every single one. Heracles managed to cut off.
2 for 1.
Very bad deal. And that became the sort of standard version. Writers like Pelaphytus, Ovid, Diodorus Siculus, they all seem to agree on this 2-for-1 deal. Although, just to add another twist, the commentator Servius mentioned 3 heads growing back for each one lost.
3. Even worse.
Right. This whole regenerative power became so central that in ancient Greece, people actually used the phrase cutting off a hydra. It wasn't just myth, it was like a common expression. It meant tackling a task that was utterly futile, where your efforts just made the problem bigger.
It's amazing how that idea, that phrase almost, still resonates today. We still talk about problems like that, where fixing one thing causes 2 new issues.
We absolutely do. And the ancients saw that connection too. Think about Plato in his dialogue Euthydemus. Socrates actually compares these tricky debaters, the sophists, to the Hydra. He says you refute one of their arguments and poof, they just come up with 2 more, making real progress almost impossible.
So it was already a metaphor back then for arguments that just won't die, or maybe complex problems that keep spawning new difficulties.
Precisely. It shows the myth was already more than just a monster story. It was a powerful way to think about difficult, seemingly endless struggles, whether that's in debate or maybe managing a difficult project or even policy issues. The ancients felt that frustration too.
That makes total sense. So, okay, we have this incredibly tough monster, regenerating heads, poisonous breath. How on earth did Heracles, the greatest hero, actually manage to defeat it? This was his second labor, right? It sounds like brute force alone wasn't going to cut it.
Definitely not. King Eurystheus gave him the task, yes. But the backstory is that Hera, Zeus's wife, who always hated Heracles, specifically raised the Hydra, hoping it would kill him. So Heracles tracks it down to its lair, this swamp near Lake Lerna. It apparently came out from a spring there, the spring of Amymone, to terrorize the local area. And the very first problem, even before the fight, was just getting close. He had to cover his mouth and nose, remember, just to avoid breathing in those deadly fumes.
Right, its very atmosphere was a weapon, so he couldn't just charge in swinging his famous club.
No, and he seems to have figured that out pretty quickly. He started fighting it, trying to use a sickle or maybe a sword or his club to chop off the heads. But just as the stories say, every time he succeeded in removing one, one or two more just sprouted right back. You can imagine the frustration. He's making the problem worse with every blow. It must have seemed completely unbeatable.
An impossible situation. And this is where his nephew, Iolaus, it wasn't purely a solo victory, which is interesting for Heracles.
Exactly. Heracles, realizing he was getting nowhere alone, called out to Iolaus for help. And Iolaus, maybe he was just clever, or maybe the myths say Athena gave him the idea. He came up with this brilliant plan. Fire. The idea was, right after Heracles cut off a head, Iolaus would immediately thrust a burning torch, a firebrand, onto the next stump.
Cauterize the wound.
Precisely. Scorch it instantly, seal it off so no new heads could grow. It was strategy. Heracles cuts, Iolaus burns. A perfect combination of might and, well, smart thinking.
A clever solution. But Hera wasn't done trying to stop him, was she? She had another trick up her sleeve.
Oh, absolutely not. She sees Heracles as actually making progress now with Iolaus helping. So she sends in another monster, a giant crab. This thing crawls out of the swamp and apparently grabs onto Heracles' foot, trying to distract him, break his rhythm.
As if fighting a regenerating multi-headed snake wasn't enough.
Right. But Heracles, focused as ever, just reportedly crushed the crab under his heel and kept going. Didn't let it phase him. So they continue the process. Cut, burn, until finally only one head is left. The immortal head.
The immortal one. How do you deal with that?
Well, Heracles apparently used a special golden sword, supposedly a gift from Athena, to slice that one off. But since it couldn't be killed, he had to dispose of it carefully. He buried it still alive, still writhing, they say, under this huge boulder on the sacred road between Lerna and another town, Elaeus. Trapped forever.
Wow. So a truly epic battle, finally won through teamwork and ingenuity. But then there was some controversy about counting the labor. Eurystheus wasn't happy.
That's right. Eurystheus, always eager to undermine Heracles, declared that this labor didn't count towards the original 10 he was assigned. His justification: Heracles got help from Iolaus.
Oh, the fine print.
Exactly, and myth experts often see this detail as a kind of narrative patch, a way to explain why the traditional number of labors might have shifted from 10 in older stories to the 12 we usually hear about today. It shows how these myths were living things, constantly being adjusted and retold. And interestingly, the Hydra story doesn't quite end there, under that rock. Its deadly power lived on, in a way. Heracles, being quite practical, apparently dipped his arrows into the Hydra's poisonous blood right after he defeated it.
Resourceful, if gruesome.
Very. And these poisoned arrows became this incredibly potent weapon he used in later labors. Against the Stymphalian birds, for example, and the giant Geryon. The Hydra's venom kept working for him.
So the monster was gone, but its essence, its poison, continued to play a role in other myths. And didn't it come back to affect Heracles himself? Through the centaur Nessus?
Yes. That's perhaps the most famous and saddest part of the Hydra's legacy. Years later, Heracles used one of those same poisoned arrows to kill a centaur named Nessus. Nessus, as he was dying, tricked Heracles' wife, Deianira. He told her his blood, now mixed with the Hydra's lethal poison, would work as a love charm to keep Heracles faithful.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so she collected some of it. Later, feeling jealous, she smeared it onto a tunic, the famous tunic of Nessus, and gave it to Heracles to wear. The poison, activated by his body heat, caused him unbearable agony clinging to his skin. It ultimately led to his horrific death. So, the Hydra's poison, conquered years before, delivered a kind of posthumous revenge.
A terrible irony. if venom outlived it and destroyed its conqueror.
It really is. And there are even these other little echoes. Ancient writers like Strabo and Pausanias mention a river in Elis, the Inigris, where the fish were supposedly inedible and the water stank. Local legend claimed it was because Heracles had washed the Hydra's poison off his arrows in that river, contaminating it forever.
Amazing how these details permeate different stories and even geography. And the Hydra didn't just leave its mark on Earth, it ended up in the stars too, didn't it?
It did. Both Greek and Roman writers tell us that Hera, even though she must have been furious, Heracles won, decided to place the Hydra and the crab he crushed up in the night sky as constellations.
So we have the constellation Hydra and the constellation Cancer, the crab.
Exactly. And apparently, when the sun is astrologically in the sign of Cancer, the constellation Hydra's head is nearby in the sky. What's really fascinating, though, is that scholars think both of these constellations probably came from even older Babylonian star signs: Bashmu, the venomous snake, and Alutu, the crayfish.
Wow. So these images, these stories, traveled across cultures, across millennia, ending up mapped onto the stars themselves.
It's a powerful reminder of how these ancient narratives were shared, adapted, and woven into the very way people understood their world and the cosmos.
What an incredible story we've explored today. A truly tenacious myth. From its shifting head count and that terrifying regeneration to its poisonous legacy and its place among the stars. The Lernian Hydra really embodies that idea of a challenge that just keeps coming back.
It really does. And what strikes me is how one creature can hold so many meanings. It's a literal monster, yes, but also this potent metaphor for problems that feel overwhelming, for struggles that seem endless. It makes you think about, the timeless human fight against things that seem impossible, and how maybe the way we see a problem is part of the battle.
So thinking about this for you, our listeners, how often do we run into situations, maybe at work or in our lives, that feel like cutting off a Hydra, where solving one issue just seems to create two more? This myth really invites us to consider persistence, yes, but also creativity, ingenuity, and maybe knowing when it's wise to ask for help, like even Heracles had to.
And perhaps something to ponder. In what parts of your own life could that principle of cauterizing the stump, addressing the root cause directly and decisively, instead of just dealing with the symptoms, be most effective? It's quite a practical lesson, really, hidden within this ancient, fantastic tale.